time for work. Since March, I've been working from home. And at first, I thought it was great for the environment. After all, tens of millions of Americans are no longer commuting to work every day, which means less carbon emissions and less pollution. But then I took a look at my energy bill, and it was up 65% compared to the same time last year. That made me start to think about all the other unintended consequences of working from home, like public transportation, which faces record low ridership and record high deficits that could lead to service cuts, which could cause more people using personal cars, leading to higher emissions. And why are all the lights on in my office when hardly anyone's there working? Well, it's complicated. So how do all these competing forces net out? Is working from home good or bad for the environment? To find out, I'm going to talk to two researchers who have looked at how remote working,
the patterns of electricity consumption that would normally indicate that it was a weekend, it looks like that 7 days a week.
and less commuting
And nitrogen dioxide levels are still below the expected values.
have impacted energy use and pollution. And I'll connect with the person who runs New York City's subway system, the chairman of the MTA, to find out how working from home at this scale threatens public transportation.
Just to be clear, we don't want to cut service at all.
I'm Lucy Biggers, and this is One Small Step. Off the bat, I want to acknowledge the privilege I have in being able to work from home. Only about 40% of the US workforce is able to work from home full time. Also, remote workers are more likely to be white and higher earning. That said, I feel so lucky to be able to work from home. I've really enjoyed the better work-life balance, sleeping in later, more flexibility with errands, and working in your sweatpants. But all this time around the house has had a major impact on my energy bill. Looking at 3 of the months that my husband and I have been working from our apartment, we used 65% more energy in July, 69% in August, and 17% in September. Compared to last year, that's an average increase of 50% in kilowatt hours per month and $51 per month. I'm not proud of that. That high increase was honestly shocking, a little embarrassing when I opened up that bill, but upon reflection, it actually makes a lot of sense. Before COVID, my husband and I were out of our apartment from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. while we were at the office. So our apartment, all of the lights were off, we were using nothing. Instead, all of our energy use was happening at our offices, where we shared a big building with hundreds of other people. Now, both of us are working from our apartment, running our computers, multiple screens, lights are on, and depending on the weather, we might have heating or cooling on. Steve Sakala is an economist and assistant professor at Tufts who just wrote about these changes in his paper, Powering Work from Home. So I reached out to find out what's going on.
Electricity consumption tends to be higher when people are at home. They're opening the fridge, they're making coffee. You sort of see the daily routines in their electricity consumption. And one of the main changes that has occurred during the pandemic is that the patterns of electricity consumption that would normally indicate that it was a weekend, it looks like that 7 days a week.
Steve's research saw residential energy use begin to rise in March and April as COVID-19 lockdown restrictions kept more people at home. By May and June, US residential energy consumption was up, on average by 10%.
And so that 10% is the combination of places that have had really big increases on the order of 40% in California, New York parts, New England, and then other parts of the country where it's been only a few percent.
And that's because the shutdowns were stronger there and the behavior changes were more.
Yeah, so it's a combination of like how much of this is being ordered by a shutdown versus how much of it is people responding with their own behavior regardless of what the shutdown is.
While residential energy went up by 10%, lockdown restrictions made commercial and industrial energy consumption drop by 12 and 14% respectively. But after May, energy use in those sectors started to rise again. By the end of July, the US was consuming on net a little bit more electricity than normal.
And that's because there was a fair recovery in industrial and commercial consumption, but residential consumption stayed at plus 10%. I think it gives us prospectively a bit of a preview of what could be a net cost of working from home, where you have both offices open and people working from home in a kind of mixed format, because you end up then cooling and heating both of those places.
This is true of my office. I went into work the other day, and although there were only 5 people in the office, almost every light was turned on. I emailed our building operations to understand why this was the case, and they said it was because of employee safety, which makes sense. If this is true in my office, now imagine the hundreds of thousands of other offices across the country in similar situations. After my Skype with Steve, he got the numbers for September energy use back. And it showed that across the country, the average residential energy use was down from 10% above normal to just 3%. He told me in an email that that decrease could be connected to less cooling. And that shows that working from home might be least sustainable in the hottest months. Okay, so at-home energy consumption is up. And if you're part of the 63% of households who get your energy from natural gas, coal, or petroleum, that's really adding to your carbon footprint. But what about commuting? That has got to be better for the climate. This animation by NASA combined satellite data, surface observations, and computer simulations to show that as lockdown restrictions went in place around the world, the dangerous pollutant, nitrogen dioxide, which is released by fossil fuel burning engines, dropped by 20 to 50% in cities under lockdown.
If you sit in your car during the commute time, you're just inhaling that nitrogen dioxide, and it's really bad. And if we can remove that, there's a huge benefit to a very large population group.
NASA PhD research scientist Dr. Christoph Keller put together this data and explained to me nitrogen dioxide levels in many areas remain low today.
It really depends a lot actually also on the region. We see that, for example, in DC, where I am, we're still quite below the expected value. So we're still like 20-25% below what we would expect. Some other cities that we look at, like Atlanta, we're almost back to normal. And then there are some other places where it's maybe sort of like 5-10%.
Do you feel like looking at these satellite images and seeing this different situation that we're in, that we are kind of in this new normal and we're never going to go back to what it looked like in 2019?
If we go back to a world where we all drive again to work, then we will see the same levels. But I could see that, especially there are now some bigger companies who have announced that they will work at least for a longer period of time where they keep people home, or maybe only half of the time that people go in. If that happens, then I could definitely see that we will, on the longer term, have reduced concentrations of nitrogen dioxide for sure.
So, if remote working continues, how many cars could it take off the road? Well, based on several surveys of business firms in the US, economists at the National Bureau of Economic Research estimate over 25 million American workers will continue to work remotely at least 2 days per week after COVID-19 is over. And of those, an estimated 76% drive to and from work in a personal vehicle. So remote working could decrease commuter car trips by 76 million trips per week. That's a massive reduction in CO2 emissions and nitrogen dioxide pollution.
What is one small step that people can take?
If you avoid driving to maybe the grocery store in the next block and maybe walk to it instead, or take a bicycle or whatever, I think that makes a big difference. I think that's one of the things about nitrogen dioxide in particular. It's so local. So if you are careful about it, it has an immediate positive impact in your community.
All right. So no longer commuting by car has some immediate environmental benefits. But I didn't take a car to work. I took public transportation, which is now seriously suffering. New York's MTA ridership is down by 70%. Chicago's CTA is down by 80%. And San Francisco's BART by 90%. New York's MTA says that unless they get $12 billion in federal aid, they could be forced to cut services by 40% and lay off half of their staff. Here's MTA Chairman Pat Foy.
We don't want to cut service. We don't want to lay any of our colleagues off, many of whom were heroic transit workers that worked through the dark days of the pandemic. But if our hand is forced and we don't get federal funding, we will have to cut subway and bus service by 40% and lay off up to 10,000 of our colleagues. We don't want to do any of that. Just make one note, the Rudin Center at New York University, a leading transportation think tank, estimates that if we had to make the cuts that I just described, that 450,000 jobs in the New York region, most of those in New York City, would just evaporate. And regional gross domestic product would be down by about $65 billion.
Do you anticipate that this lower ridership will continue even after we have a vaccine? Like, we'll never be back to 2019 levels?
I don't agree with that. It's a question of when we get back. We project that following the vaccination of a significant percentage of the American population, ridership will continue to increase. And obviously, ridership on the subways is low and depressed. But in the worst days of the pandemic in the spring of this year, we were carrying 5% of passengers. So now we're at 30. We've got a long way to go.
Chairman Foy is hopeful, but there's no guarantee that we'll see pre-COVID numbers on public transit. Early research out of the city of Ningbo, China, a city of similar population to New York, found that months after the city had 0 daily COVID cases and experienced no deaths, public transit use was still depressed by 80%, and personal vehicle use rose by 40%. It's really concerning to me in a city like Ningbo that has COVID under control, you're still seeing an uptick in personal vehicle use. If it's happening there, you can only imagine how many Americans are also making a similar choice of a personal vehicle over public transit. And if that happens, it could counterbalance all the positives that we're seeing from less people commuting to work. In the meantime, the MTA, which still transports 3 million passengers a day, is waiting for a bailout.
With the new administration coming in, are you more hopeful that that could happen?
Absolutely. The president-elect Joe Biden was known as Amtrak Joe and rode daily between Wilmington, Delaware, his hometown, and Washington, D.C. when he was in the Senate. He's been a longtime supporter of mass transit. His election, gives us real hope.
So, is working from home good or bad for the environment? Well, before I answer that, I just want to reiterate that working from home is a huge privilege. Essential workers have kept our economy running during this pandemic, and they are majority Black and brown workers who are simultaneously more exposed to COVID-19. So, I am so grateful to the millions of people who have worked so hard to keep our society running. I am so grateful to you. Thank you. Now, to answer this question, is it good or bad? I really think it depends. So if you used to drive to work and now you're working from home, I would say that your footprint is now actually lower. And that's because although you've got that higher energy bill at home, it's counterbalanced by the fact that you're no longer driving to work, releasing pollution and carbon emissions. So for you former car commuters, this is my one small step. Stop driving to work and work remotely as much as you can. Now, for someone like me who used to take public transportation or you walked or biked to work, I would say our footprints are a bit higher. And that's because our commute before wasn't high in emissions. So we have nothing to balance out this new at-home energy consumption that we're all doing. So for us city dwellers and really everyone working from home, here's my one small step. Use less energy at home. Just be super mindful of not using the cooling when you don't need to, turning off those lights. This is something we've been told forever, and I think it proves to work. Just from examining my own bill, I'm realizing that I gotta be better about turning off those lights and not always blasting the AC. But it's worth noting that there are a lot of other benefits to working from home. After all, there's that age-old expression that says the secret to a happy life is a short commute. And that literally is working from home. And so it's better work-life balance, better mental health, more access to jobs for people with disabilities. And all of these variables, I think, help make the full picture of this new working from home life. So I'd love to know where you land on this working from home sustainability. Do you think your new way of working is more or less sustainable? Let me know in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Bye! All right, time to turn off all my lights. Wait, I should have filmed the whole video like this. What was I thinking? I had lights on, I could have had them off, I could have had my energy bill down. That's called living the change.
The news can be a lot. There's a lot of good out there and a lot of fearless kids and families putting kindness into action in their own communities. But the first step towards helping is understanding, and that's where we come in.
Everyone wants to understand the world, which is why we're bringing the news to your family the Now This Way.
Each week we'll talk about the important issues, the positive progress, and the unsung heroes who are changing things for the better.
With the weekly YouTube series, podcast, and newsletter,
We'll explore the uplifting stories that inspire us
and dive deep to understand our changing world together.
on Now This Kids,